All right, well, thanks everybody for coming today. I know it's a Friday afternoon and things are winding down a little bit, so I appreciate you coming to the lecture. I'd like to first thank the Friends of Art for their support in bringing in our visiting artists, and so really they're instrumental in allowing us the financial support to bring in a variety of people throughout the academic year and actually through the summer as well. To speak and to enlighten our students in terms of their voices and their perspectives on their artwork and speaking with the students. Today we're very fortunate to have Neil Callander come and visit us. He came in yesterday afternoon and spent time with individual students critiquing with their work. And so Neil has a BFA from Indiana University 2003. He earned an MFA from Rutgers in 2006. In the summer of 2005, he spent a fellowship at Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in Maine. And then as well, he's also worked as a painter for Jeff Koons in New York. And so I'm really interested in hearing some of these stories. And so hopefully later, he'll tell us a little bit about that. In 2007, he left New York City to pursue his teaching career. He's taught at various institutions in the South, including stops in Louisville, Kentucky, Starkville, Mississippi, and Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And he's currently an assistant professor of painting and drawing at the University of Arkansas, where he's been there since 2017. So he's had a really impressive exhibition record, various solo exhibitions, Goose Barnacle Gallery in Brooklyn, Bowling Green State University in Ohio, the Kentucky School of Art in Louisville, and then of course various numerous group exhibitions, too numerous to mention. The most recent though is Artists and Children at the EAC, and that was co-curated by Sam Preston and Brigham Dimmock. And so Neil had a couple really nice paintings over in that the show. I think it closes today, Brigham, is it? Yeah, so that was a very nice show. He's also in various private and public collections, John Yaw and Eve Ashheim in New York, Indiana University, Rutgers University. I'm going to read just a little bit of his artist statement from the website. So a painting's visual layers and individual marks compress time, providing an experience that resists quick absorption by the viewer. I pack a painting with cultural and personal references and work toward an image that is visually provocative, yet narratively open to interpretation. I construct elaborate setups and paint them through careful observation, focusing on the meanings objects collect post-consumption as they enter and participate in our lives. I sidestep pop art's ironic vision and instead borrow stylistically from Flemish Golden Age painters to comment on material abundance in American culture. Of particular influence is the master of the crowded market stall, Franz Snijders, who mixed symbols of life and death while embracing nasty moments as part of a delightful whole. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Neil, who will elaborate on this. So please join me in welcoming Neil Callander.
Thank you, John, for that nice introduction. And thanks, it's great to be here. Thanks for the people that brought me, John, Brigham, Sam, and I'm sure other people that I just don't know that work to bring me here. I'd say it's one of the great treats of being in this job is like if you get this invitation, you can drive or travel across America, and if you know which door to go into, you open it up and there are people like earnestly making art inside, and it's kind of amazing because you wouldn't think at the end of that cornfield would be like a building bristling with kind of activity in the arts. It's always kind of an invigorating thing to happen. Is there a way to get the lights down? Right here?
I think it's the one
Turn those on. There, that's good. Okay, I want to take you through, the way I set it up is just like a rough chronology, the typical way, but I'm going to try to leave time for, I will leave time and hopefully stir up some sort of comments and questions from you guys, because that's the most fun part anyway of these talks. So maybe be thinking about that as we go. We have like, what, an hour? Is that the plan? Okay. I'm a gardener. Maybe some of you guys are too. I like gardening because it's simple. There's just sunlight and water and soil and a plant. And you try to get those things in the right balance to make something grow. You have to carefully observe the plant to make sure, that it's doing all right. Does it need water? Does it need more sunlight? Does it need whatever? You're making observations. You also have to learn about a particular plant, what it likes, what conditions it likes to make it grow. I also like extended metaphor. And I would say that my painting practice is like growing paintings in the studio in a similar way that one would grow a garden. Let me try. I have my notes on here, but my slide here, so this will take me a moment. Do I arrow? Uh-oh, Brigham. How do I advance?
How about the mouse?
Mouse. Yeah, there it is, the mouse. Great. Okay. So when I was, probably around most of your all's age, an undergraduate in art school, so like 18 and 19, and just sort of like at that moment waking up to painting, like what painting is, and seeing paintings for the first time, like in person, going on trips and like going to museums or wherever and seeing paintings. I saw both of these two paintings. This is Agnes Martin's White Flowers. It's at the Met in New York. And I had, granted I was like, hormonal teenager and primed, but I had an emotional reaction to this painting. I turned the corner, there it was. There was something about that painting that's seemingly very simple, but really actually subtle in its complexity. It's also seemingly calm, but not really like low energy calm. It's kind of intense actually when you see it. You think it's, perfect, but when you get up close, that's all like hand painted, grid. And so there are imperfections, the unsteadiness of the human hand, unsteadiness of the pressure of the brush. And it kind of had this intensity about it that I responded to. Also in a similar time, but in Italy, so around the same year, I saw this painting by Pontormo. It's the deposition of Christ that's in situ in the Santa Felicita Chapel in Florence. So that means in the place where it's supposed to be. And I had another emotional reaction, but to a very different kind of structure. Like if you look at this painting, it's essentially a narrative painting, but it doesn't do a very good job at explaining the narrative, right? This is like a moment with Christ is dead and he's like being carried here by these people, but it looks like an Easter party or something. And there's all this swirling cloaks, and this guy's like pink and teal flesh right here. And it's kind of swirls your eye across as you zigzag across that whole composition. There's like surprising color. It's a really kind of theatrical composition. Pontormo was, it was like late Renaissance, so the Baroque, Mannerist sort of painting, and just because it's fun, that's him there in brown with the green headscarf. He put himself in that scene, which is pretty bold to go on and put your self-portrait in the scene of Christ being taken off the cross. But I can formulate these thoughts now. At the time, I couldn't quite formulate them. But looking back, I can tell you that what struck me about both these paintings was two very different types of geometries. One kind of very organized and calm, the other one organized but seemingly much more dramatic and chaotic. And I thought, I had some sort of semblance of the thought that a painter's job composing the painting should reflect the painter's own sort of personal philosophy. This makes some sense in that Pontormo was bold enough to put himself, like that's kind of some ego, right? He must have pretty high esteem of himself, and he's daring to put himself into this scene. Agnes Martin, we know, lived on top of a mesa in the desert alone and painted that painting. But that more so than subject matter, the way the geometry of the painting is constructed should reflect the painter. Oh wait, this, I didn't do that. Okay, so let me show you a disastrous early example, right, where unskilled, so this is me maybe 19 years old, kind of unskilled, but trying really hard. My idea was, I'm just gonna slap them together in the same painting. I'll take this, my Agnes Martin moment here of like stripes and the architecture of a white chair. And then I'm gonna put it underneath this kind of swirly nightmare of arms and head self-portrait. And it doesn't work so well. It actually feels like a nightmare. I mean, it's kind of a terrifying image. So then I think really to start the talk here, this was one of my first, I think of it now as mature paintings. It's mature. Stop. Let's go back. It's mature because I sacrificed the whole Pontormo-y idea of composition, and instead thought, no, I want to paint calmer, cooler in its emotional content paintings that sort of are more objects to be just sort of confronted rather than objects to be, you know, immersed into, like a Pontormo composition pulls you in. I'll take a moment to say every painting that I'm going to show you is done from direct observation. So that means that the subject matter is there physically, typically in the studio, and I'm staring at it and trying to pick up information perceptually and put it into the painting. In this case, I hit on this idea of these old TVs, which are fantastic, and which TVs now kind of suck in their design. I mean, the TVs in the 90s were really bad. At least they're now kind of neutral. The TVs from the 70s were fantastic. They had little knobs on them that you had to go up and fondle, you know, to make things happen. And they had, they were made of metal and glass and wood. And the glass kind of bulged out into your space a little bit. This is the Zenith, by the way, which was some of the finest ones. And I turned in this case, turned the TV to static. And I thought very much that static was like an Agnes Martin painting, you know, surrounded by a pretty realistic construction of the TV cabinet. It was important that it was static because I thought, I played around actually, like what if there was, you know, Serena Williams playing tennis on the screen or something. Then all of a sudden that TV is in a very particular time and place. But if it's static, it's turned on, so it's like alive, you know. It's not just a nostalgic item in a museum or a curio shop. But it's not really locating itself in a particular time and place. And of course, it's old, the TV from multiple decades ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the scale of this?
Oh, yes, sorry, interrupting. Thank you for that kind of detailing stuff. So it's a larger than life, but it's not this big, obviously. It's 54 inches wide. And these are all oil on Usually they're on some sort of muslin or panels, or muslin or linen stretched over a panel. So I started to think about compositional geometries that would make sense to me. That TV painting led to a bunch of other paintings that I'll show you some. And it was this idea of a bulge into our space that I thought that I started to think of as a pregnant bubble. Like that was my language that I liked. Something that sort of protruded gently into our space, and it felt like a container for something unknown. Was a strong compositional idea for me, pregnant bubble. So I played around with things like a TV, but turned off. So you get that glassy kind of bulge into our space. This is smaller, it's like only 14 inches. Or a pillow stripped of its dressing. It's sort of softer and pushing out gently into our space. This this painting really solidified for me the idea that one of the ways that I was going to judge the success of a painting is if it had relationship with the edges of the rectangle, the edges of the picture plane. That to me was going to be very important, that it felt like it was this may be a reach, but for me it felt like it was self-aware. If an image of an object felt like it was in some way in a relationship with the edges of the picture plane, which is essentially its world that it lives within, then it's like it becomes self-aware of its situation.
How did the face conflate with the pillow?
Did you see a face in there? Is that what you're saying?
I do.
Yeah. It just sort of happened, and I thought, that's interesting, and I let it be.
I guess.
Yeah, it just kind of happened with it. Two eyes. Okay. Chronological, oh wait, one more painting. So, or this painting, same kind of pregnant bubble. I was seeking other things that I could crop down that wouldn't feel particularly cropped. It would be a sense of wholeness, but that were gently things that protruded into our space, like my forehead, which is called five head. Right. So then that little guy happened, and things changed for me. I became a father and a homeowner and a husband and a dog owner, and I had life responsibilities. And as some of you probably know, when life situations change, sometimes that can be disruptive to what momentum you had in the studio. We also moved to Kentucky. We left New York. And I went back to the museums to try to find, some help. And I did. These were two, still to me, very important paintings, very different paintings in some ways. Philip Guston, painting called Painter's Forms, which, Guston, called Painter's Forms because these are some typical Philip Guston objects, like a boot, a cigarette butt, a bottle. These are things that show up in a lot of Philip Guston paintings. But look how stupid this painting is. It's just a mouth puking up some stuff. It's a Genesis story, is how I started to see it. This is Genesis of Philip Guston. There's no background, there's nothing yet. There's just some sort of deity puking up some stuff. And this painting here by Franz Snijders is also a Genesis story. It's the same kind of idea where you have a guy kind of presenting us with stuff. In this case, it's a market stall scene, and we are to select from his, goods here, his meats and his vegetables. And it's equally, I stood in front of this painting, which, by the way, that one was at the Met, at the Philip Guston Perspective. This one I saw, it's in the permanent collection of the Art Institute of Chicago. And I walked into that room and saw this painting, and the word that struck me was delightful. This painting is delightful, and it is. There's so much going on. There's like a cat under here that's looking out at the cocks fighting. There's this little pickpocket boy right here who's pickpocketing the guy as he tells us, shows us his stuff. There's this kind of elaborate composition that all these forces that sort of point to one another. For example, the white diagonal wings of the bird that's alive, and then the white diagonal wings down here of the bird that's dead. There's like this parade of reds that move you through, which is largely stemming from this boar's bloody mouth that trickles down here. I mean, I would challenge anyone to stand in front of the painting and not just be like, dazzled by how delightful it is. And it occurred to me, two things occurred to me. One, I want my paintings to be delightful. They were a little stoic in the past, and I want them to feel like delightful. That's largely how my life felt. I had a little kid. It somehow felt really wrong to paint a singular kind of quiet object and then go wipe someone's butt, or mash up some bananas and feed them to a kid and then try to be all serious like Agnes Martin. That just didn't feel right. This felt more reflective of my life at that point. Then the Guston, it occurred to me that, for one, I can create a whole world inside of the painting, that I should probably take myself a little less seriously and think about painting as a sort of parallel universe in which I can be the one in charge of making up all kinds of bizarre rules. Also, that painting doesn't have to be as hard as we make it sometimes, that it's pretty stupid activity, actually, and that it can be kind of dumb, and that a painting idea should sound kind of dumb to say. For example, this is one of the first paintings that came after that. And for example, I'm going to go down in the basement and just paint the junk down there. That's my brilliant idea, at this stage. And that's what I did. Basements are fantastic places. They're full of all the detritus from your house, like eventually gets to the basement. There's storage down there. There's like a little workspace down there. There's all kinds of stuff happening. This painting called Dusty Stacks. I put a white ring around it so you can see it separated from the black background. It's very dark. And it was one of the first paintings that I did that had, for a while, that had more than just one object in it. Which you painters know, there's a big difference between painting one thing and painting two things. You have that relationships like that. And you can see I'm trying to do things to keep myself entertained. Like it was really fun painting that Rabbit is Rich by John Updike. John Updike has just died. I read his book and I put it in there and then made the reflection in the Miller highlight can. That gave me a little jolt of happiness to paint that. My favorite movie, Ghostbusters, on VHS. And just to make some sense of this, there's a mirror that runs right across the halfway point in the painting. So everything in the foreground is reflected again in the background. So it's actually a very shallow space that we makes it feel different. Here's some details. So I started to like this painting a lot and thought about it as maybe going to become many more paintings that come from this idea. The compositional geometry that I used, I thought of it as a tangled donut. That still is a handy metaphor for me. I like empty centers when the composition is empty in the middle, but there's lots of stuff going on around. Yeah, your question?
Did you compose it? Did you compose this or find it in your basement?
Oh, both. A little bit of both.
Well, I wondered how much of it you might rearrange and compose, and you started to talk about the center being open, and maybe if there was something there, you would move it. Didn't please you?
Yeah, no, I see your question. It's all composed. I mean, there was some of this stuff was down there, but I composed it and I added more to it. I'm not a purist like that, you know. I'm okay with the idea that I'm in charge. This circle in this case, I'm the one making the decision. So yeah, things got shifted a lot, added, taken away, added back, shifted around a lot. Yeah.
It's like maybe being a writer, you know, where things you've seen, you remember it and start to bring into the composition.
So to richen it, right? You might have an idea, some sort of basic framework, but then to make it feel more real or alive, complex, interesting, you try to inject more and more into it. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And when it works, it usually makes it better. Absolutely. But this kind of tangled donut idea that the center is empty and that around the edges, I'm going to have compositional, zigzaggy kind of diagonal movements that sort of should move your eye, hopefully, around and around and around. Felt pretty poignant. It felt like it reflected my life. Some detail shots here. Show you this one because it was a proud moment to make that spick and span look like it was fluorescent orange in shadow. That took a while, and I'm proud of that moment. Indian yellow. Anybody interested? Magic color. Okay, this painting then came after, also in the basement studio. I have a quote to read, short quote, by Matthew Weiner, who is the producer and sometimes director of Mad Men. Do you guys ever watch that movie, or that show, Mad Men? It's fantastic, you know, and it looks like 1960. And the question was to Matthew Weiner, how do you make it look so real? Like it really looks like that time period. He says, when you do 1960, someone did not go out to a store and buy everything that day. The woman's clothing is not from the Vogue magazine 1960 because it wasn't available to regular people until 1962. So if you are doing 2007, you can look around and see there are people dressed from the 80s. There are antiques around. There is furniture. Everything that went on beforehand is existing at the same time, which I thought was a pretty amazing statement. And I thought reflected sort of the basement situation, that there could be a painting that felt very of the present moment, that contained objects from a second ago, like a cherry pie plate that I just ate and put in the still life, or Dwight Schrute from The Office. And it could have stuff from long ago, like this margarine container, which no one buys margarine anymore, but they used to be used for everything in my household growing up. Or old antique chair. So this is still a tangled donut composition with an empty center or a little bit off center, and quite a, I hope, a delightful force of compositional movements that pull you all the way around. Let's give you a couple examples. Like, so this down here is kind of dominated by ellipses. And you get in a parade of ellipses that move the eye all around, and back to the coolers, and then the Miller highlight bottles line right up the ellipses of the cup. And hopefully you go round and round, round and round. I have students sometimes make lists of what they don't want people to call their paintings. Some words for me are cool. I wouldn't want someone to call my paintings cool, or aloof, or minimal. I think of them more as humorous, or humanistic, or narrative. These are words I'm okay with. Like Julie Andrews and Dwight Schrute, forever side by side. That's about as funny as I get. So my painting practice became dipping down into the studio between teaching, between helping my son, between working on the house. I could only steal away hour here, hour there, 2 hours here. And I had to find a way to grapple with that kind of demand of life. And so I could go down there and I could like paint an old iPod today. Right? Today I painted the old iPod and feel like I advanced the painting, and I didn't have to feel like I was just turning my gears. I could dip down and just paint a little bit. Then things got even a little crazier. I started to really like that idea, and challenge myself. How much could I pack in? So I thought, I'll put 2 TVs in there and my dog and a figure in the background. And really kind of push this idea of formal rhythms and rhymes that visually kind of knit the painting together. You know, that it feels messy, but also feels very composed. That was a line that I wanted to straddle. I felt like I could slice in a little sex and a little humor and a little lowbrow, like Cheese Whiz, that's easy cheese. And I could just kind of put it all in. Duck sauce packet. But not in a way, it's not easy to do actually. And I would hope that someone could be with this painting for a long time. And then like after, living with it for a long time, you might notice something like this. The girl on the Miller highlight can, and her pose with her arm up to her head forming the triangle, and the baseball player in the World Series, St. Louis Cardinals, Detroit Tigers, his hand making the same sort of pose. That'd be like a little connection there that would take time to figure out, and that the painting took forever to make, and the viewing of the painting maybe can take forever. Or the girl's hand pinning up laundry to dry, and Captain Crunch's hand, sort of side by side.
I have a question. Before
Yeah.
You said you had set up how you were doing your painting, and you would go down and visualize it and paint. When you did the later work with the woman and dog, did you just come up with that, or just take pictures of your wife down there and then later add that? Or?
No, always 100% done from direct observation. That's a model I paid to come in and pose for me.
So the woman, did she stand down there and while you painted? Oh,
Yep. Yep. She's a terrific model, and she was going for like and I wanted her to look like maybe a niece that helps a guy out who's like maybe a bachelor, but his niece comes over and like helps him out a little bit.
And the dog was made.
Now the dog was I painted from life, but then I had to resolve it with a little help from the photograph. That's maybe like the only time I've ever done. I did studies of the dog and I put him in there, but I couldn't get it sharp enough because of the dog. And I'm not that good. So I had to take a photograph. But all the color was figured out and the composition was figured out from life. I just needed a little help with the detail. But what did you say about digitize? Did you say digitize?
Yeah, you did. You said something about digitizing transfers.
Never mind. It's all right.
Oh, did you?
Did you?
Okay. Did you?
Yeah, that's what I heard. Did you?
Yeah. So these paintings, this one's called Dusty's Table. And Dusty, it's a funny story I'll tell you about. Dusty was a nameless fictional character that I was using just to get out of my own way. Like, this is Dusty's world, not Neil's world. And so it freed me up to make some interesting decisions. And I took a painting, that first round painting, I took it to a gallery and I needed a title. And my son was in the car, he was like 2. And I asked him what I should title the painting. And he said, what's the title? Because he's 2. And I said, it's like a name for a painting. And he said, how about Dusty? And I don't know where he came up with that, but I thought, that's perfect. It's like, is it a guy? Is it a girl? Definitely an American. I've only ever met American Dusties, which I'm interested in. And it's also a pun on like Dusty Basement. And it just conjured this person who I've never written about or don't really talk about because he's purely existing as defined by still life paintings. It's just there to fuel still life paintings. He also likes Chinese food. Okay, this is a diagram. I know you guys have to write artist statements sometimes. You probably hate them as much as I do. And I find it very handy to make little drawings as artist statements. This is an idea I had in the studio. After painting those paintings, I started to think about the success and failure, what works and what doesn't work, and what's a way I can judge paintings as good or bad. And to my mind, I made a kind of a dichotomy between specific visual language, like detail-y things where things get very, very tight and specific, and narrative ambiguity. I want narratives to feel like they're open for interpretation, not necessarily given to us like a storybook. So I made this little diagram that if the narrative ambiguity gets too ambiguous, the painting fails and it falls into the sea of vagueness, where it's just vague and uninteresting. You know, there's nothing there to grip us. Or if the specific visual language gets really overwrought, then it falls into the sea of over-clarification, which is equally as boring. And I like paintings that straddle and balance that, to make that balance of those two forces in interesting ways. And to show you, I have a couple examples. Like this painting is interesting. Mark Rothko, right? Why doesn't this painting tip into the sea of vagueness? There's nothing going on. It's just sort of like blurry color, you know? But somehow he was able, what's specific about it is the emotional content that is conveyed. And it's sort of magical how that's conveyed. But it's like an extreme example where it's very, very vague visually, you might say, but something is so specific emotionally that he's able to get away with such a simple composition. Or this painting, which is very specific in its visual language, but it doesn't doesn't fall into the sea of over-clarification. And the reason why is why we love this painting, which is the mysterious sort of look that the Mona Lisa has. right? That mystery keeps us questioning the painting and keeps us all very intrigued by it. Or why this painting, I think, fails. Thomas Kincaid painting. It's trying to be mysterious. It's giving us a lot of information, but there's really no real mystery here. I know exactly who lives in that house and what goes on here, and it's kind of relies on overwrought sort of imagery that doesn't keep me guessing. Okay, so in that way of thinking, I went about making some paintings that had more mystery. I was interested in that, the idea of getting very specific, but keeping the mystery open. So I'm going to speed up here a little bit and show you just some images like of a night window. Here's a little detail of some sprouting plants under a grow light, and then looking through the window into, at night, a tree illuminated by a street light. This painting with this strange big golden plank in the middle, and then all the activity shoved over into the edges of the composition. Or this painting is similar to the last one, with all things shoved over to the edges, including my son down there and Gumby on TV over there. For this painting, of a couple gradations with a floating transparent scarf. Very specific, right? But I think hopefully at least somewhat intriguing. The idea being that as a painter, I can come up with enough visual hooks so that the viewer stays interested, but never gets an answer from me. They have to bring their own. This is called Winter Geraniums. Because of that show, Artists and Children, I made a little section here of paintings of my son that my son modeled for. He's a very good model. Every one of his weekly chores is to model for some painting. So this is him playing darts downstairs in the studio.
Now, did this painting start out as a tondo, or did it start out as a square?
It actually, you guys can see that. It started out in this division here. And here. Started out as the van and half of him, like a little painting. And then you can see these panels that got added on and expanded outward to a somewhat of a squarish looking unusual shape, and then it got cut down into a tondo. They don't usually happen that way, but that one did. This guy, it's a little painting. This guy, which is in the show, Artists and Children. This one is maybe more specific in its narrative, but I was compelled by that moment in the afternoon when a child comes home kind of exhausted and sweaty from school, and they are at wit's end, they're starting to unravel a little bit, and you gotta take off one shoe and you give them some chocolate milk, and it's just a moment of breathe out and breathe in. And this painting, which is in the show, which, if you'd let me just read a little bit, a very short thing in that comes from an interview that I did with the Midwest Capacity blog, just because I can't say it better than I said it when I thought it out very carefully here. So I'm convinced that if painting is to have a place in our future, it is not through copying the modes and manners of popular culture. There is no way painting could stay relevant. Cinema is king of narrative. Photography is a much more efficient form of documentation. Music is superior at catharsis. Television and the internet own propaganda. That leaves painting the domains of materiality and ambiguity. So it's not important what is going on so much. I just find it important that you want to try to figure out what's going on. A couple details. To give you some sense of what the studio can look like, you know. Very much, there's the thing. I hung a giant aluminum foil ball from the ceiling with some balls and a pink light, and these are weird setups that are all just to make the painting better. Okay, and I want to show you one other thing, which is fresh. This is fresh from the studio. This is not my painting. This is Durr, but this is where this painting started. I saw this weird painting by Durr of Saint Anne. Look how weird that is. I just looked at her outfit and I thought, this is, I really like how weird that is, that look. Her eyes are googling out there, and she's like the saint of healing, you know, and she's got this whole weird outfit. Anyway, that was the start. This was the beginning of this painting. Just scribbling on a surface, self-portrait. Then it goes to this. This is me, like, as Saint Anne, you know. I'm not overthinking it, all right? I think I'm like, Gatorade is my healing, you know, liquid down there. The painting evolves. The expression changes. I start adding some other things. I think like some green onions and ginger, garlic. We're adding some more things. Took the Gatorade away. But this is the same painting, right? This is what I'm showing you, how much these things can evolve. Added some Napa cabbage. These are actually the ingredients you need to make kimchi, which sounds like a stupid idea, right? I don't know. That's what I was into. I was playing around with adding more stuff. I eventually did paint these things in here, right? Then the painting went away for a while and came back out. And it became something else. I put a horse skull in there. And at this moment, I was sort of frustrated, and I thought, this painting is just going to become a dumping ground. That was what I was thinking. Anything I want to paint, I'm just going to dump it into this one and see if I can make that work. Give you some sense, here it is, growing in the studio. Here it is a little bit later. I added a lot of onions and a bunch of other skulls. And there it is, like yesterday or 2 days ago in the studio. Still in progress, but starting to fill up. I have this idea that if I can keep adding objects, and I want to get up to this point where every object is being overlapped and not clear what is going on. That everything is being obscured. It's so like jam-packed full of stuff that reads as like just a big kind of pile or something. And then you can discover all these little things, like a chimpanzee skull. Or some of these onions have been hanging so long that they've sprouted. Okay, and now, sorry if I talked a little long, but we have time for questions. or comments or thoughts? Let's have some. Yes.
I'm curious about the last one you talked about this process of time. How long have you been working on that?
Years.
Years.
Yeah, years. In fact, I'm uninterested in finishing. I only finish because I have to. And not, if I didn't, I would feel like some sort of failure or something. You have to visit it and stuff.
So yours is evolving with you. It's changing as you're changing.
Yeah, yes, which is important because you have one idea. Who says that the law is that you have one idea and that has to be the idea in the painting at the end? And that you can't have another idea and try to put that into the same painting. And then you have another idea and try to put that in. That seems like interesting to me, to try to let a painting feel more like how we are, complex, torn between this and that, you know. That seems interesting. So I'm kind of a little sick of that painting, so I'm trying to wrap it up in the next month. And if I can't, it'll just sit until I bring it back out. But I think I'm gonna wrap it up. It's been a while. Yeah.
You mentioned you abandoned the theatricality from like Bono, and I'm wondering, and I kind of see that being introduced into the paintings.
Yeah, totally.
And I'm wondering, you also mentioned something about adding on and kind of moving things around your still life, and I'm wondering whether that process is, do you see yourself removing yourself from the painting, or do you see yourself adding yourself like details to it?
I think so. What do you mean removing myself? Do you mean
Like by
that it's
for
not
example,
about me?
like creating these fictional characters.
Yeah.
Like you said, is that one way to remove yourself?
Yes.
To create this freedom to
Yes. Yeah. Like, I mean, they're definitely still about me. You know what I mean? But they don't have to directly be about me. I think that's a dangerous trap. You take yourself too seriously, and they gotta all be like, this is a autobiography of this moment in my past. That's a little dicey, I think. I think it's more messy than that. A memory in life is more messy. So I might have a couple of things like that. Like if it's an object that I feel nostalgic for, just toss it in. You know, I'll put it in there. But yeah, I try not to. I mean, I want them to be open. I feel like if it was too specific about me, that it would close some people off. And yes, it was definitely in a more Pontormo-y moment. I think I kind of have some of my shit together, you know, and I can like, I don't know, be a little bit more, what was the word, theatrical? It's a good question. Yeah, how about some more? We have a little.
Can
Yeah.
you talk about the choice of a square rectangle painting?
Yeah.
Condo, I'm interested in especially working in circle.
Yeah, they're fun. They're kind of hard. I haven't come up with a lot of great compositional success stories on the Tondo, other than donut or the ball. Like, hard. But I like squares because it's of that language of abstraction. Like a lot of abstract painters work on squares. It's a hard shape. It's like, you know, it's charged somehow. And I like that you feel the edges, not necessarily. I'm sort of into balancing between that window. We think of painting as a window, you know, there's that kind of rectangle. And my painting definitely, because it's realistic, could be thought that way, but the square kind of runs counter to that understanding, which you can't tell I like things like that. Slam two things together. But people seem to really like the condos. I don't know. I think circles are just wonderful, but it's fun to work on.
Well, and that's why symmetry, you can't,
Yeah,
there's no way to be out of balance.
that's right. if there's no corners, right? I mean, obviously, but that, as a painter, I always like, let's put it in the corner, you know, that could occupy that corner. But when there's no corners, it's tricky.
Now, when you go to Iceland, are you gonna paint, like set up still lifes with the environment in the background, or is the environment gonna play anything?
Yeah, well, I went to Iceland.
Oh, you already went.
Yeah, we went for a residency there for a month, and none of those paintings are from there. The best thing to come out of Iceland for me in the studio was a palette. The light over there is kind of crazy in the summer, and it's so lush and green in the summer. And I arrived at this strange palette. Indian yellow deep is kind of like the dominant color, which is, you know, intense yellow. Cobalt blue, Venetian red, Mars violet, and Perylene black, which is like a green black, and then white. I took a bunch of paints with that palette I've been using now since Iceland, and it's weird, you know. But you can get pretty much the same range. Like I can get a dark blue, and I can get a nice pink, and I can get a good green, but somehow it tends to tinge towards a secondary triad of orange, green, and violet. You know, a lot like this painting, for example, painted that way, that Iceland palette. And you can see it's, you know, there's not a lot of red. You know, it's like orange, green, and violets are kind of things that it allows for. So there's something about the strangeness there. I mean, I know I talked to a lot of students, but I think these decisions that we make in the studio about which materials to use and how we go about structure, like what size canvas, linen, board, whatever it is, those are big decisions that make huge differences in terms of the meaning of the artwork at the end. And I think we maybe give it short shrift, those decisions. You know what I mean? So yeah, that palette is like the best thing from my Iceland experience. Which Iceland all the way, you should all know, is fantastic in the summer. Fantastic. Not icy. Yeah.
Nice segue to what is the palette that you'll start your students with, or that you used in the past?
A good student palette, I know it's always changing.
Yeah, it does.
I mean, some things that are always on there are, you know, like burnt umber and ultramarine blue. Because to have those two, you don't have to have black. You can mix up warm blacks and cool blacks with those two. We usually always have those. I mean, we'll usually have a Venetian red and some sort of bright red. So maybe cadmium or maybe quinacridone or something. And an earthy yellow and a bright yellow. Although I don't love them and I never use them, I have them by Phthalo. They're dangerous colors,
Yes.
but they certainly can give you a range and a range of darks. I never use those colors myself, but I've seen them.
Actually, that's slightly different color.
Yeah, but it always changes. And lately our strategy has been, we have them by this set of maybe 11 colors. And then we have these reserves where you can just dole out a little cadmium red light for this student. Or like, you should really try using cerulean. Let's give you a little dollop. You know.
I'm going to ask this question really loud so they can hear it. So your two paintings in the show, they're side by side. And one thing that I'm really struck by is how different they're built with your brushwork.
Yeah.
So like the one with your son with one shoe off has this kind of matrix of horizontal brush marks that kind of atomize the contours. And the one with the giant, let's call it aluminum foil balloon, has these kind of moments of reflection in the shape of the reflection. Do you give yourself some kind of new strategies for how you build the surface?
Yeah, totally. That there's a couple other smaller ones that came with the one of my son with his shoe off, and it was a very kind of directed attempt in the studio to make the painting more brushy. You know, it's like I look at a painting, or some like that dark circle painting, the dark one, Dusty Stacks and dark brown. I really like that painting, but then I thought, I need this to have more color. I want my paintings to be more colorful. So that's where that pink light showed up. Pink light and green light, all of a sudden I could put anything in there and I could get more color. So yeah, just formally I'm interested in pushing my range, you know, and I admire certain painters and I want to try to do what they do. So yes, that was my strategy. That's a little bit, that one you were talking about a little bit, Ann Gale, just thinking about it. I just like that idea that a form could be going this way, but she constructs it like this, and then just a little sense of where the edge is. Instead of going with the form, you go always counter so that it's broken up and physically can't fill it in, you know? Filling it in feels bad in the studio. Fill it in. Ooh, gross. So yeah, now when I'm using a lot more medium, and it's a very coarse weave, and I also was using the knife and sort of just making marks like this with the knife, just because I felt strong enough in my ability to draw, which this is not what you're asking, but I'll take it to one other level, which is I think students get panicky because they're not as confident in their ability to save a painting. You know, it's all about being in that zone where the painting is doing stuff, but it doesn't necessarily look like the thing. That students panic, and then they make the big mistake of rushing to make it look like the thing. Whereas I think the thing that separates why I get to be the teacher and they get to be the student is I'm okay letting it just sort of ride this zone where it doesn't look good for a long time, because I know from experience I can make it look good later. But there's other stuff that I want to happen so that when I make it look good, it looks better, you know? And that seems to be a really tough one for students, because they want it to feel like they're capable. I can make a shoe look like a shoe. I can do it. Look, do it. But I do it too early. So that's how I felt like I could pull that painting off. It looked really mushy for a long time until a few edges got sharpened, a few details got inserted. Like I show you. That's a great question. I'm going to go back to that. Right there. I don't know if you can tell, but this whole wall over here, like most of the painting looked like this. And this backpack, which isn't a backpack until they put the little buckle on it. And then all of a sudden, poof, you know, there it is. So you can see a lot of it scraped down and marked and scraped down and marked, and then it's just slowly tightened a little bit. Yeah. Are there any other thoughts or comments?
I noticed that you have a lot of recurring objects in your paintings. Is that because you enjoy painting certain objects? Like you've gotten to a point where you paint them really well and you just...
Yeah, which ones stood out to you?
Like the tin foil and the cans. They pop up quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I got two things about that. One, it's like the Philip Guston idea, or most things, but you sort of get like a stable of objects that, you know, why invent the wheel, reinvent the wheel every time? There's certain things that work really well. I like tinfoil because it's so angular, and you could throw it in there and it picks the light up very clearly, so it supports the illusion of some sort of lighting situation, and it'll slow the viewer down because it's so like a little nugget of zigzags, so it'll be a moment to slow down. Also, tinfoil is great. Use it for, you know, mundane things like wrapping food, which is fun to think about. And I had another. What was that?
The cans.
Oh, and then then there are things like, I mean, I'm interested in brands that we choose to support our identity, like this whole self-fashioning idea of the human American, that we get to like, I'm a Miller guy, I'm a Bud guy, you know, like that's an interesting idea because it's meaningless really. They taste exactly the same, right? Or whatever it is. It's like the things are identical, but somehow Miller Lite and Miller High Life seems to me, this came out of like the Dusty experience. That seemed to be more like his, you know, Wisconsin-y blue collar background. It just made more sense for that. So there are certain things like brands of things that I like to include. Not so much in this one. That's all right. Do you have any things like that?
Oh, probably, but I don't realize it yet.
I like to collect them. Like, would you ever buy a Mazda? Mazda people are interested.
What's your favorite artist?
Favorite artist? I showed you some, right? Some of those painters are important to me. I don't know. In what regard, favorite?
I admire as a hero.
As a hero? Rembrandt. Rembrandt is kind of, I put on a pedestal. If I was having a dinner party, you know, where you get to invite anyone from the past, like present, I would invite Rembrandt. And most of those Dutch painters I really enjoy, or the Flemish painters, that they painted nasty things so beautifully. Rembrandt paints himself as a drunk buffoon a lot, in glorious, bathed in like glorious warm light. I just love that combination. I think the Dutch are my favorite painters. The Spanish I could take or leave them. You know. Some of them are all right, but the Dutch painters I think they're really well onto something.
When you're playing around with like this idea of like a parallel universe or another kind of like identity to sort of play off of, is there ever a point where you have to say like I need to like stop and like reset myself? I feel like you're talking about the like Miller High Life thing. You're like, this is the beer that this guy likes, so and it's gonna be my painting. So I'm like drinking it while it's happening.
Yeah,
is there ever a point when it gets like too real?
I was eating way too much junk food when I was painting that big complex painting with all that stuff in it. Because I would, you know, get tempted and be like, I'm gonna put some cheese whiz on a Ritz cracker, which is not my regular diet, you know. No, you know, it's kind of, I never got lost in character or something. If that's what you're sort of saying, because that guy was really, yeah, it almost sounds mean. Remember, he's not a real guy, right? He's created purely to service my paintings. He's like just this creation that I needed to get out of my own way. So I don't feel bad for him at all. I don't even really feel that much sympathy or empathy for that. That's not true. I feel a little empathy for that character, but I haven't done it again. Maybe I will, I don't know. It's just been Dusty, and that was what I needed in that moment. Yeah. Because it's not, I don't know, 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 it's I'm not making a movie, you know what I mean? It's not about that. It's just about the pain.
Yeah, I've just been looking at this painting and enjoying it. I'm sorry that I wasn't in town to see do the opening, but could you just chat a little bit about when you're moving color around, for example? You know, as I'm looking in the center here and I'm noticing, you know, this move with the red cloth down to the forearm, and then there's these various brackets of color going from red towards orange towards yellow, and then as you come up the back arm, it's lavender. And then, you know, there's these two blues on either side of the young boys, you know. And so I'm just engaged in watching how, you know, even from like the upper left-hand corner, that yellow panel, which sort of picks up the yellow bowl, the yellow bowl, my God, it's gorgeous. Piece of plastic.
Yeah, it's that plastic from the
Could you just, like, if you were sort of guiding us, you know,
Yeah.
there's guiding you through like forces of lines and shapes and directional forces, but if you were guiding us coloristically with some of your decisions, would you mind just sort of exploring that?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that
Yeah.
for a long, long time.
Yeah.
But,
It's the game, isn't it?
pretty much every painting that I do now, I'm always, sometimes I control it, but I always have two colors of light. You know, so like for example, pull that off in here, I have the daylight, which is cool and bluish coming from that window. And then the door opens up to a little porch that had yellow fabric hanging over the window. The light coming in there is filtered through this yellow fabric. I was talking to this painter, Elizabeth Johnson, who said, "Oh, I looked at your paintings. You're just like me. You organize around the rainbow." And I thought, oh, that's exactly right. Doesn't everyone do that? And she said, no, people don't do that. And not everyone does that. So I definitely think color-wise, even with a limited palette, I'll ask myself, what is the purpliest purple that I see? In the same way you might ask, what is the lightest light you see? But I seek out the rainbow. Where's the greenest thing? Even if it's not screaming green, there still should be a greenish thing, a greenest thing. So there is that, and then there's this idea of which really is, I look at Franz Snyder's for this idea, but to create these kind of rhythms where one color picks up across the painting. So it's almost like you have the movements of perspective that moves you through the space. You can have the movement of someone's gaze or their position in the body in space that sort of give you a compositional movement. But then in a kind of a subtler way, you can have a movement of a color that also is like a tangential movement through space. So like, yeah, there's this red. I mean, it's very considered that I would have the red milk carton, the red shirt, and the red little stretchy bungee cord there, and the red backpack, and the red radio, so that if your eye catches red, you know, if you're thinking red, you get to experience the whole thing. And likewise, if your red catches blue, you would go, you know, blue placemat and blue down here in the corner, blue out the window, and blue bungee cord, and blue over here on the door, so that your eye gets to move around the whole painting, you know, on the blue path. And yeah, I think about that a lot. It gives me a little joy to do that, to make these rhymes. It feels like the painting gets stitched together like another type of stitching. And it becomes more of a contained universe. Of course, that doesn't work unless you have other harder to define colors, like the mucky ones, the ones that are like barely orange or barely, you know, you need that hierarchy of color to sort of probably be most of the painting so that these punctuated moments are support.
Thank you.